start linking them together, you create an order. When you have many communities in the same place, you start creating a complex system called a biome. And then when you have many biomes interacting, you have a biosphere. So in terms of order, this is kind of an example of what they're talking about by order. The entire theme of this thing has to do with interspecific competition, or interspecific relations, let's call them. And Campbell was one of us when he was a child, because everything has a but. Everything in biology has a but for more than one reason. For everything you come up with, there's going to be the but. There is an exception to almost every single rule in biology. There are very few that really don't have an exception. So I would kindly ask you to indulge me. As you're reading through Campbell, you're going to see the buts in everything. We're just going to kind of talk about the high points here. And in terms of interspecific, what are they talking about with interspecific? What does that word mean? Kevin?
Between species.
Yeah, between species. So this word literally means the relationship between species. Before we even talk about what's in Campbell, what can you tell me about the relationships you already know about between different species?
Well, one is predation.
Mm-hmm. And in order to be a predator, you must have prey. So, is that term kind of arbitrary, or is it fixed? Don't know what arbitrary and fixed means, right? Arbitrary is willy-nilly, just at will, and fixed means you got one title, Mr. Arbiter, biology teacher extraordinaire, or just teacher. Okay, so in the case of a cat catching a mouse, the cat would be the predator, and the mouse would be the prey. And then you get a big giant hawk flying overhead, and the hawk comes swooping down, and Fluffy goes flying away with the hawk. The cat then becomes prey, and the hawk is the so it's not fixed, it's kind of arbitrary. It's relative. Sir?
Could it be like a community?
Well, yeah, it is a community. There was one year I taught environmental science, and I was out hiking, and I found owl pellets, and I was like, oh, neat. Real owl pellets. Huh? Yeah, that's the fun part. You try to figure out what they ate. So we buy them. Mrs. Lighthip used to do them with bio. She does them. I think she does them with environmental. I have a few. But I found a real one. I was just so excited that I found a real one. And I had, of course, I'm a geek, so I have plastic bags in my backpack. So as I'm hiking, when I find these things, I stick them in a bag and I bring them home and I bring them into class. And that's why I have a cabinet full of specimen over there, because I found them around while hiking mostly. So I got into environmental science, and we had done the owl pellets, and I had one group that did a particularly really good job for once. And I said, hey, I got a real owl pellet. You want to dissect a real owl pellet from an owl here in Connecticut? And they're sure. So they start dissecting the owl pellet. And very different than what you buy from the biological supply companies, because the biological supply companies have these owls and they put them in a habitat and they feed them a very specific diet of certain rodents so that you can go back and pick out what they ate. So we're sitting there, we're picking through, and there's like a femur this long, and I'm like, wow, this owl is good. He got something really good. And we're picking through a little more, and then there's this skull with really sharp teeth, like canine teeth, and I'm like, wow, this owl was really good. And then we go a little further, and we start to see these claws, and I'm like, and the kids are like, woo, they're putting it together, and I'm like, what kind of rodent is this? And I'm like, a rodent with canine teeth is what it's like. It's not a rodent. So what is it? Somebody's kitten. This stupid owl got a kitten because the claws were just so obvious it was a cat. I was like, oh. You gave us a dead cat. I did. I didn't know. How would I know? Anyway, alright, so in terms of these interspecific relationships, Campbell came up with this brilliant system of plus, minus, and O, where plus indicates what in the relationship?
Positive, like.
Benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I make out. Negative means,
Suffer.
sorry,
No one
yeah,
gets
you lose, and 0 means,
No point.
yeah, no
Nope.
foul. Yeah, no big deal. Either way, we're good. Yeah, there are, that one's the hard one to define. Alright, so he goes back and says, okay, we're gonna talk about competition. So in terms of competition, and you're talking about two species competing for the same resource. So the hawk wanted to eat Fluffy and Bowser wanted to eat Fluffy. Between the hawk and Bowser, how would you rate positive, negative, 0? How is the hawk affected by Bowser's appetite for kitties?
Well, the hawk would be positive if he got the prey, but it would be negative for Bowser since Bowser didn't.
Okay, so in one case it's, well, so now what's gonna happen to Bowser? Well, let's be a little more realistic. Let's say we have a snake, a rat snake that eats rats, and we have a fox that's hunting and killing and eating rats. They're both competing for the same resource. If the rat snake can get into holes and all that fun stuff and trap the rats and eat them, how does that affect the fox?
It affects the fox negatively because it shortens the amount of food supply that they can attain and get a hold of.
Right, and the rat snakes are going to get the babies, because the babies are usually in a nest. Whereas the fox, however, is really more interested in getting the adults, because there's more meat for the effort. So the foxes start killing all the adults, and how does that affect the rat snakes looking for nests? Negatively. So typically in competition, one species, if they're competing for the same resource, it's usually a negative-negative sort of interaction. Yeah, it does kind of look like a little owl with a kitty hanging out of its mouth. So in competition, typically, it's bad for both predators, or both whoever they're looking for. And then your book talks about something called the competitive exclusion principle, which is extremely important. Superficially, you're going to be like, if you think that's important, you have no life. But it does come back a little bit. In the competitive exclusion principle, you guys read the book. What is the competitive exclusion rule? Was in, again, in environmental science, because that's the other thing I teach, but not anymore because Light took it. But in the competitive exclusion idea principle, whatever they call it in the book. Somebody, come on.
I thought it was if they have, you gave us an example about like the lizards, it was that they all hunted the same prey, but they enjoyed different habitats, so like, and then the prey didn't, so they wouldn't really affect each other even though they're competing over the same.
Okay.
Correct.
So what's this exclusion thing?
Only because they're not everybody beats one another.
Okay. Ultimately resulting in?
Positive.
Could it be that, like, it's only that they're competing for food, they're not competing for territory, it's only like one thing that they're competing for?
Whether it's food or territory, if it is a vital resource, if you have two different species competing for the exact same resource, what will be the ultimate result? Okay? One species will go extinct. So the competitive exclusion principle states that when two species are dependent upon the same resource, one will go extinct. And they have proven this over and over and over again in the lab.
Didn't they do it with bacteria as an example in the book?
Paramecium. Yep. Two different kinds of paramecium. you can't have two groups fighting over the same material and expect that they're going to survive, because one population is somehow or another going to be better than the other. And over time, it's going to end up beating that other population. This thing is starting to buzz me. There's some, now, I said this is actually really, really important. And it feeds into another idea they were talking about called character displacement, but Campbell had the good sense to say, well, let's talk about a niche first. So, an ecological niche. Hard thing to give you a working definition for, but does anybody want to take a stab at what somebody's niche is?
The place where the organism fits into the environment,
The place.
or the way it fits into the environment.
Yeah, I like that, the way it fits into the environment.
The amount of resources a population takes up and its impact on the other species in the environment.
I like that too. What else? You're both right. Your niche is every way you interact with the living and non-living portions of your environment, which is as big a net as I could possibly throw. A species net interactions. It is how you build your nests, it's how you interact with your neighbors, it's how you dispose of your waste, it's how you do your hunting, it's how you do your mating, it's how you do. Every aspect of how you live is part of your ecological niche. That ties into competitive exclusion principle, because if you are relying on the same resource, that biotic or abiotic element, and you're in competition with somebody else, if that resource is critical to your success and you are outcompeted, your species will disappear from that area. Not necessarily from existence, but you will go extinct in that, at least in that area. So why am I saying this is so important? They talk about something called character displacement. Anybody remember what character displacement talks about?
How if two species compete for the same resource, one characteristic of the species might be changed so they don't compete for the same resource. They get different
Close.
resources.
Very close.
If two species fit in the same niche, then one of them goes extinct, or
Well, they go extinct, or what's the other option? Or? Oh, I didn't think of that. Yeah, there's a different option though. He said the same thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
they kind of split the niche?
kinda. Kinda.
They change it in like a way so they're not, they're kind of like they're sharing the space, but they're not sharing the prey for the, like they change prey in a way.
Maybe. Yeah.
They do something that the other species doesn't do that no other animal does, so that they fit in.
There you go. They do something else. So within every population, there is variation. This beginning to sound similar, sound like something? In every population, there is variation. Yeah. Who noticed that? Darwin. If you have this population, and this population really does use this resource, what's your favorite type of protein food?
Chicken.
Chicken.
Gnats.
What's that?
Gnats.
You like eating gnats.
According to
Really
my
how you stay
football.
thin. Randy, your favorite protein?
Avalanche.
Do you have a ladder for protein tonight? Okay. Anybody real beef fan in here? There you go. All right. So if it turns out that there are groups competing for the chicken, and you know, Randy is just a generalist. He's fine with whatever he can come across, but I got a definite fan of. I love chicken too. My life would not be complete without chicken at least 3 or 4 times a week. Yeah, yeah, I love chicken. Beef is just kind of, you can't do much with it. Chicken, you can give 10 million different flavors to. Beef is kind of beef. Yeah. So chicken you can work with. I like chicken. Anyway, we have other ways, we have other resources we could diverge out of. So although chicken may be my primary resource, you and I would have to suffer and eat the other stuff too. So we could expand outward a little bit. We have a choice. So within a population, we have the beef lovers, we have the chicken lovers, we have the generalist. This is not a great example because humans obviously are not in competition with anybody. We kill everything that bugs us pretty much, except for diseases which kill us. They get us first. So what ends up happening is you may have competition over a similar resource, but you can change your niche enough so that you could still eke out a living using that resource, but you have other elements that you could branch into. If you can't do that and you are in direct competition for that resource for your survival, one of you will survive, the other will go extinct. That's just the nature of the beast. So in character displacement, they're talking about that other thing you can do. And then they talked about allopatric and sympatric species.
So it's kind of like the competitive exclusion, but so it's like
Here's
you
the but.
could go extinct, but you could.
But if there's variation inside of your population and you could start to take advantage of a different resource so that you're not totally reliant, those individuals that can exploit that other resource are going to do better than those chicken lovers, unfortunately. So although we might survive and reproduce, the other ones are going to end up doing better than us. And then they talked about allopatric and sympatric. I know it was in a different chapter. Did anybody bother looking it up? You don't know what it is, but you looked it up. I would assume everybody got the top. So let's talk about character displacement very briefly, because when we do evolution, we'll talk a lot about it. Not a lot, but. So we were at character displacement. And the statement that Campbell made was that there is more in sympatric populations and there is less in allopatric. So in a, did anybody who took Latin? Anybody from classical? No? Nobody took Latin? This prefix sim, anybody want to guess what that means?
Same?
Same. Sympathy, I feel the same way you do. And how about allo? Close. Yeah, I guess you could say different, that's one. Generally it's the other. So, and then patria is what? We get the word patriot from. Homeland. Yeah. So same homeland or different homelands. So in two populations in the same homeland, so you have two populations competing in the exact same area, you need character displacement. You need to have that development of the other resource. We can overlap on this resource, but we need other things. That overlap could be time differences. So you can hunt, you know, a rat snake will hunt during the day. Foxes hunt during the night. So you could hunt for that same resource, but at 2 different times during the day. So you could start, you know, rats are going to be in a different place during the day than they are at night. You know, foxes eat things other than rats. Rat snakes don't eat much other than rats. I mean, they'll eat chipmunks and squirrels and if they could get them and whatnot, but primary diet is rat. Fox, rat, overlap, but they eat other things. Now, allopatric occurs when you see the same species separated and they can't mix. So if you saw on the Grand Canyon, you have the Grand Canyon, and there's a squirrel on one side of the Grand Canyon and a squirrel on the other side of the Grand Canyon, they don't mix. That's a little bit much. It's not worth it. They have their sides of the canyon to explore their resources. They're not going to experience a whole lot of character displacement, so those populations are going to stay rather similar. They won't evolve very quickly or change over time unless something else forces that end of evolution. If you're in the same population competing over the same resource, that competition will become fierce and selection becomes fierce. So you find more character displacement when there's higher competition due to sympatric populations rather than allopatric. That's that whole evolution piece that we'll be talking about over and over and over and over. Because that's the new theme of advanced placement biology. Alright, niche and income displacement, okay. And then they talk about predation. And in predation, with that positive negative thing, the predators affected positive, negative, or 0. Positive. And the prey item is affected positive, negative, or 0. Negative. Alright, so we all know what predator and prey are. Not a big deal. In terms of predators, we want to talk about adaptations of predators. So I'm not going to make, this is going to be a big list, but when you take a look at the class of predators, what adaptations do they have that would lead you to believe that they are well suited to their task? Claws. Sharp teeth.
Better vision at night.
Better night vision.
Heightened senses.
Yeah, improved senses.
Speed.
Higher speed. Case of spiders and snakes. Poison. Alright, so there are specific adaptations we associate with predators. And then there are adaptations of prey, which were more interesting, because the book talked about a few that were worthy of note. Now obviously if you're a prey item, what's your best line of defense? Yeah, camouflage. And they lumped it under this idea of cryptic coloration, because we can't just say camouflage. Because this is biology, we need a new word. Of course. Yeah, biology is just loaded with specific vocab. Sir?
Bright colors or colors similar, bright colors that, I'm trying to think of how to say this.
Okay, give it a sec. Bright colors that, what do they do? I see yellow and black, what do I know?
What do you think it would be?
Yeah, it's gonna stay. I didn't even tell you what I was talking about, I saw yellow and black, it could have been a canary. Right?
Oh, wasn't mimicry one?
Yeah, there's 2 kinds of mimicry, right? So cryptic coloration, it could be something so simple as camo. I always spelled this wrong, but I think that's how you spell camouflage. And then there was this idea of mimicry. I think I spelled that wrong. I don't know why I can't spell things like in Russian. The way you say it is exactly the way it's spelled. Nini cry. Mimicry. Alright, there are 2 types of mimicry that they talked about. I'll give you the names. One is Batesian, and the other is Valerian, right? Get the spelling right for you, Valerian. What was the difference between Batesian versus Mullerian mimicry? Sir?
I think it was Batesian where it mimics what the predator looks like.
They could mimic a predator. That's
And
possible.
The other one mimics another harmless species.
Kinda. Yeah.
I think, I'm not pronounce that, but,
Mullerian?
yeah. That's more like you, imitate the species that the predator doesn't actually prey on. And that's it, Batesian is more like, you mimic something that the predator wants to avoid, something like that.
Okay.
I don't know what, I know the definitions, just not which one goes with which name. It was
Okay.
like, it disguises itself as something that's poisonous to eat, something that's dangerous that you don't really want to deal with.
Right.
Or it disguises itself so you can't see it, it's camouflage, it blends into the background.
Let me read it to you. Some prey species are protected by their resemblance to other species. In Batesian mimicry, a palatable or harmless species mimics an unpalatable or harmful one. The larva of the hawk moth puffs up its head and thorax when disturbed, looking like the head of a small poisonous snake. In this case, the mimicry even involves behavior. The larva weaves its head back and forth and hisses like a snake. In Mullerian mimicry, two or more unpalatable species, such as the cuckoo bee and the yellow jacket, resemble each other. Presumably, the more unpalatable prey they are, the more quickly predators learn to avoid prey with that particular appearance. The shared appearance thus becomes a kind of aposematic coloration. So, in the case of Batesian, I think the way I memorized it was bait and switch. You know that expression? I'm trying to fool you, so it's kind of like the way they do that shell game. You bait and then you switch it out real fast, or you knock off the table. So this is I'm going to fool you. I'm going to make you believe I'm this other thing and I'm dangerous. In Mullerian, what ends up happening is this pattern seems to emerge of like black and yellow, like I said to him, or red and yellow. And predators start to learn very quickly that these objects don't taste good, or they're poisonous, or they can hurt me, one or the other. So Mullerian mimicry is you kind of have everybody mimicking that same poison ID. I evolved to get to that coloration and things leave me alone, and I am actually not good to eat, so it's a good idea to leave me alone. Some being worse than others. So that was the whole idea behind mimicry, which I thought was kind of cute. And then they talk about the aposematic coloration, which is basically advertisement that I'm poisonous. So, yeah, kind of interesting. This is the fun stuff in bio. If we were doing it at the end of the year, and if you were over, I would have been able to like show movie after movie probably of interesting things like this. Herbivory. What is herbivory?
Only eat plants, plant-based diet.
Yeah, herbivores. For the herbivore, plus minus 0. It's a plus for the plant.
Minus.
It's predation upon plants, basically. So in terms of the predator, what adaptations does the herbivore have? Something different, come on. What's a
Thorns.
No, the herbivore,
Oh.
not the plant. Sorry?
Don't they usually have flat teeth?
Usually they do have flat teeth. They have a deer skull up there with teeth in it. You could see that they're actually, not only are they flat, but they're also grooved to increase the surface area.
Oh, I was going to say strong stomach acid.
They usually have like multiple stomachs. The ruminants have multiple stomachs, and they also like chew their cud. If you've ever seen cows, they have a stomach where they hold it and then they kind of spit it back up and they chew on it and then they swallow it, spit it up, chew on it. It works its way through their system. So that's called cud, C-U-D. What else?
They might have long necks to reach up into the trees.
Giraffes, for sure. Do Herbivores eat all plants. No. How do they know which ones are the good ones and the bad ones?
Whichever ones don't hurt them or kill them.
And how do they know that, well, I mean, ultimately they can identify by what? By vision and frequently by odor. Some plants will release different chemicals to clue you in that are not palatable. So herbivore adaptations include teeth, specialized digestive systems, certain body structures to enable them to get to these things. Now, in terms of plant adaptations, to deal with an herbivore, what are some of the plant's abilities it developed to protect itself?
Make itself like not taste good, like peppers and stuff. They are really spicy. You don't wanna.
Right.
Hi, excuse me, can I borrow some paper towels? I didn't
Oh,
think ahead.
yeah, absolutely. They're in that cabinet of those
It's
two
the
stores
line.
at the end over the termite nest there.
Is there in the cabinet?
Yeah, just above. Kath, just above.
Oh,
There you go.
there's some down here.
Oh, aren't I good?
Thank you.
What's that? Poison, yeah. What's some poisonous plants?
Cinnamon.
Just some animals, yeah.
Like poison ivy.
Yeah, poison ivy. For us, I guess we have 10% of people are immune, 90% get the rash. Oh, you don't get the rash?
No.
Oh. I get it so bad.
Thorns.
Thorns are another adaptation. Oh.
Basically chemical protection.
And there are certain chemicals. So some of them are toxic. So we have certain toxic chemicals, clove, cinnamon, peppermint, really strong sort of toxic things. Some are just bitter. And that discourages like insects from eating them. Any of you fans of red wine? I like red wine better than white wine, but what makes a red wine taste different than a white wine? You see, my mother is Italian, my father's Russian, so we grew up having wine with dinner. So it was normal to have, growing up, to have a little. I mean, it's not like we were staggering away from the dinner table. We were allowed to have a little. So I grew up drinking wine, except my mother liked the really sweet Italian wines. So I grew up drinking the sweet wines, and then as I got older and you meet people who are a little more sophisticated, they're like, "Ew, you like the sweet stuff? Just have a soda." And then you try other things. So I discovered I like red wine way better than I like sweet wines or white wine for that matter. But the bitter taste that red wines have are actually due to a toxic, not a toxic chemical, but a chemical that makes them really bitter called tannin. Tannic acid is also better known as tea. Tea leaves are made from these same sort of things. They're meant to discourage you, poor tea plant, having its leaves ripped off on a day-to-day basis. And thorns, all that stuff. So there is herbivory. Sir?
Isn't nicotine a chemical that's supposed to keep bugs away, but then it kind of doesn't work to its advantage today as people?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever wonder who was the first person to sit there and decide to start smoking something?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, who was walking along in the forest going, I'm going to smoke that plant. Of all the plants out there, just I'm going to smoke that one. Yeah, that one. And they found tobacco.
Poison ivy instead.
Yeah.
No.
You die.
I'm gonna.
Mountain laurel.
People get really high on poison ivy getting in their throat and stuff.
Oh, poison ivy. Well, I will give you an opportunity to laugh at me. Last year, I had Lyme's disease, and I probably had it for about 5 years undiagnosed. And I went to my doctor, and I was just like, down and out. I'm 40-something years old. I feel like I'm 80. My joints hurt. I'm tired all the time. I have no energy. What is going on? So he ran all kinds of tests. He did testosterone. He looked at my thyroid. He looked at my cholesterol. I mean, he just did all these tests. And he's just like, you're getting old. And I'm like, it shouldn't feel this bad to get old. I'm telling you, there's something wrong. So I jumped online and I looked and I said, I want you to do a Lyme's titer on me. Anything else, Dr. Harbanuck? And I'm like, stop being a smart ass. Just run what I asked you to run. I'm paying for it. I'm not asking for charity. Just run it. So I had him run that, and I had him run a few other things. Folic acid, et cetera, et cetera. My doctor's learned to just do what I say at this point. He hates me. But, I'll call him up. I need an antibiotic. Any preference? Yeah, Augmentin, please. We have a gram negative this time. He gets a little annoyed with me. But I had Lyme's, and it turned out that the test came back, and he's like, okay, you got that, very good, Dr. Harbanuck, whatever, just pass. So he gives me the prescription, and for about 3 months, it was like I had a whole new life. I wasn't tired, I didn't hurt anymore, my knees didn't bother me, my hands didn't hurt. I was going up mountains, down mountains, I was like a psycho woodsman. And then you kind of have this delayed reaction to Lyme's, where your joints then again become very sore. And literally my hands, it felt like somebody took a hammer and broke every bone in every finger I have. It just hurt constantly. So I was looking for homeopathic remedies. So I went to Whole Foods, and they had somebody there, and I'm like, listen, I had Lyme's, joint pain, big joint pain. And she goes, okay. She goes looking through, and she found this thing for constant joint pain. So she gave it to me, and I'm looking at it. And it's those little white pills, you put them on your tongue, five, 3 times a day. So I'm like, okay, fine. So I'm taking these pills, and the pain was better. I mean, it didn't go away, but it was better. And I started getting the worst sore throat. I mean, really, really sore throat. But I kept taking the pills because my hands were getting better and better, slowly but surely, and you know, it wasn't as bad, and I was able to go kayaking, do whatever. So this went on for the entire summer. And my throat just got rawer and rawer and rawer, and I'm like, it must be connected to these pills. So then I was sitting there with a flashlight, you know, you're trying to do that in the mirror and see the back of your throat, and there were bumps in the back of my throat, and I'm like, what the hell do I have? So I go to the doctor, and they gave me antibiotic. Worked for about a day. I mean, it disappeared for a day, and then it came back again, and I'm like, then I started getting worried, and I'm like, if antibiotic can't kill this, what do I have? And I felt fine. I wasn't sick. I mean, talking like this the entire summer, my throat was absolutely raw. So, and I had these giant bubbles in the back of my throat. I'm like, what's going on here? So I went to a different doctor, and he's like, oh yeah, you have an infection, and he gave me a different antibiotic, and I took that, and it did nothing. So finally, I'm sitting there, and I was looking at my little capsules, and I had just gotten my iPhone. So I pulled out my iPhone, and I said, and I saw it was, the plant species was Toxoplasma something something. So I said, so I got on the phone and said, what is Toxoplasma, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, let me look that up for you. And Wikipedia comes across, and guess what it was?
Poison ivy.
Poison ivy. The woman fed me poison ivy. And I took poison ivy for 3 months. So I had a massive case of poison ivy in my throat from these stupid pills. Stupid adaptations. This herbivore learned his lesson. Don't eat poison ivy. Yeah, it was awful. I stopped taking it, and about 2 weeks later, my throat was totally fine. So if you're going to do that homeopathic stuff, just make sure you figure out what they're feeding you before you start taking it. Oh, this is good stuff. All right. So in herbivory, generally speaking, and I say generally speaking because this is also not necessarily true. Campbell did not do a nice job with this. Herbivores will also eat fruits. What's inside of a fruit? Seeds. If you eat the seeds and then you go somewhere else and you poop the seeds out, not only were you kind enough to distribute that plant's seeds to other locations away from the parent, but you also gave it fertilizer to start it off in the world. So, you know, for that individual plant, I would agree it's probably negative. However, for the species as a whole, it's probably a big positive.
Shouldn't be neutral.
Huh?
Shouldn't be like partly neutral.
Well, neutral means no benefit, no loss. So, I mean, to the plant itself, I'd say loss. But, you know, to the species, potentially it's positive. After my run-in with poison ivy, I was just on this rampage to kill every poison ivy plant on the planet. And I was going to spray all that stuff down in, because I go into that woods area down there a lot, and I get poison ivy really bad. I have it on my nose. I don't know how I got poison ivy on my nose. But I was just walking, I didn't touch any of the plants, and I'm super careful. I know I didn't rub my face in it, but I have some on my nose.
Sleepwalking?
Sleep slow collecting? Yeah. I was so angry yesterday I had to collect slugs. You have no idea. Anyway, I had so much I need to get done. The slugs died. Oh. All right. we talk about parasitism. Okay, so for parasitism, what is, for the parasite, plus minus negative, or plus minus zero rather? Definitely a plus. For the host? Yeah, by definition, it has to be a negative for parasites. You are a parasite if you are living off of somebody else. Your parents have probably called you this. Yes.
You taught us this yesterday, leeches.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are, sorry. Not on me, so you can, they can have, whatever, have your parents kick it up. No, chop a few more, I don't care. Now, a parasite falls into one of two categories. Either it is an ectoparasite, which is what a leech is, or an endoparasite.
Oh, so like tapeworms?
Yep, like a tapeworm. So in terms of ectoparasites, things that attach on the outside of your body and do you harm, what would those sorts of organisms be?
Leeches.
Yeah, I gave you leech. Who else? Mosquito?
Yeah.
Skeeters. What else?
Ticks.
Yeah, my favorite. Oh, yeah. Ticks. Anybody else?
Fleas?
Lice. Fleas. Is lice singular or plural?
Plural.
It is plural. What's the singular form? Louse. So when somebody calls you lousy, yeah, they're implying that you are an ectoparasite. Yeah, a louse. So you're a total louse. Anyway, in terms of endoparasites, there are lots of those, but ultimately, I think of a few.
Toxoplasma,
Toxoplasma, which gives you,
it doesn't do anything to you. It just stays in your brain. 50% of the human population has it.
and wouldn't really be a parasite, it'd be a mutual, well, it'd probably be maybe a mutualist, not a mutualist.
What does it do?
Commensalist.
It makes you like cats.
Huh?
You're talking about cat scratch fever?
Toxoplasma.
You need the last part of it. Toxoplasma is a species.
Plasmosis, I think.
That is cat scratch fever. Yeah, that could kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah, tapeworms.
No wonder I don't like cats, I don't have.
Yeah.
Tapeworms, blood flukes, liver flukes, virus like HIV. Hepatitis, herpes, although probably all of you have some version of herpes in you right now. If you've had chickenpox, you have herpes.
I've had it like 2 times, I wouldn't spread it around.
Many bacteria, so disease-causing bacteria, pathogenic bacteria. Viruses are by definition pathogen. Certain types of worms, like heartworm, ascarids.
Freaky parasites.
There are some really interesting parasites. So things of that sort. They're kind of fun. I have a movie on them. One day when we're really bored, I will show you them.
I want something about this lady. She took these weight loss pills, but they're like sketchy ones on like you find online. And so she started taking it. She was losing like a lot of weight, but then one day she woke up and she had blood on her pillow. And then when she looked up, it was like a 3 feet long tapeworm that came out her nose while she was sleeping. It was like in her digestive tract. It was like really creepy. And the pills had like some sort of like, it was some sort of like larva.
Yeah.
Like tapeworm, I don't know what larva, it was like a larva like of it, and then it just started growing inside of her.
Yeah. Tapeworms belong to a group called Cestota. We'll get to those right up just before the exam. We'll get into that stuff about a month and a half before the exam. Sir?
Well, this is like kind of off topic. You said you know how humans do the law, like apes and stuff.
we didn't evolve from apes, we evolved from an ape-like ancestor. You're probably not reading that cladogram right. Cladograms are next February. Yeah.
Why is it if you go to like a natural history museum, it'll show like the evolution from an ape?
The ascent of man.
Oh God.
Like, are they trying to teach us wrong things?
They, see, the problem is when you say humans came from an ape-like ancestor, that has to do with that whole allopatric sympatric deal there. Some apes took advantage of the grasslands. Us, as a matter of fact. There were forests that changed over into grasslands when climates changed in the distant past. Those apes kind of split into a variety of different groups, most of which have gone extinct. So we have a common ape ancestor with chimps way back. That ancestor is gone. So that ape that kind of gave rise to this grassland population of primates that eventually gave rise to humans is different than the population that gave rise to chimps. Chimps are not really grassland animals, you find them in forests. So we share 98% of the same DNA as a chimpanzee. That ancestor is gone, they died out. They didn't survive the forest or the grassland. Somehow or another they were outcompeted by the groups that stayed with the trees and the groups that moved directly into grassland, which eventually became us. Baboons are also a kindred spirit. They also take advantage of grassland. There are a few different ape species. So when they show it to you, nobody has ever seen these ancestors. We have fossils of what they were like, and we've done facial reconstructions and body reconstructions, and we've looked at the nature of their hips and how you shifted from a tree-dwelling animal, arboreal, to a bipedal terrestrial animal. They have to have some way to represent it, and they, for some reason or other, always start off, if they start off with a chimp, they're doing you a disservice, because chimps did not evolve into human beings.
Or else we wouldn't have chimps.
Right, the chimps would be gone, because they evolved into human beings. So the first one they show in that line should never be a chimpanzee. It should be something that's kind of looking like one maybe, but not a chimpanzee. It should be standing upright more, and a little, the hips would be different.
Okay, so with the common ancestor, did it branch off into two different things, and one branch was a chimpanzee and one branch was us?
It branched into several things.
Okay, but one of them was a chimpanzee and monkeys, and one was us.
Yeah, we're monkeys, we're primates. We're in the group with primates. We have all the characteristics. Yeah. Wow, you guys are interested in the human evolution thing. Most people get really upset about that stuff. Yeah, I don't particularly care. I look at some people and I just damn well know we came from monkeys.
They have proof of that some humans have evolved, but then others are not really that.
Oh, I think we're some monkeys with high class and some monkeys with no class.
Yeah, there was a story
We're all a
about
bunch of
this
silly
little girl
monkeys.
with the tail. There was a story.
Monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some alien culture out there watching our planet going, wow, that's what happens to a planet run by monkeys. Alright, the next relationship that they talk about is mutualism. Now, what is mutualism?
Where there's a benefit on both sides.
Yeah, everybody benefits, we got a double plus sign here. Both species benefit. One may benefit more than the other, but in essence, both species benefit from this relationship. And there are a lot of examples of this, actually. Your pets, I mean, they've benefiting from you and you benefit from them. If you have a dog, he guards you or she guards you, and you protect them and take care of them and give them food and medicine. So,
My dog runs through the screen door.
yeah, break screen doors, aggravates your parents, that benefits you.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Doesn't benefit them, but hey.
Tries the
Alright, so,
attention away from me.
yeah, points the gun in a different direction. Alright, so examples of mutualism. What did your book say? Or do you know some that are outside of the book? Because that's always more interesting.
Bacteria that are outside, you like the ones that are in your intestine help you break down food. You have thousands of species of bacteria inside of you.
Yeah, E. coli actually help you. Yeah, you need them. And they also keep other bacteria that could potentially hurt you out. They colonize that area. Sir?
There was also a species of bird and then crocodile where the bird would go over and I think it would kill certain organisms on the crocodile and then fly away. And literally the bird would sit on top of the crocodile's nose and swim around.
Okay, so the bird got food, crocodile gets
Less bugs.
Unparasited.
unparasited. Yeah.
The remora, it eats whatever dead material, whatever material is on a shark, and then the shark gets clean.
Okay, Mason?
Are pollinators?
Many pollinating species, yeah, like bees, the flower gets fertilized, the bee gets food. Is that how we stole your thunder? There are species of ants that will tend aphids, the like little the ants protect the aphids and the aphids produce. Wow, choked on the bug. It was kind of interesting because, again, at the house I left, there was this one bush, I don't know what it was, right by my dock. And if you disturb the bush, this nest of ants would come out and bite the heck out of you. And they were always stationed all along this particular bush. And I don't know if they were tending aphids, because I could never really get that close.
Oh, inside of the book, I know that you don't want to try and relate to examples in the book,
It's okay.
but there was this plant species that was very thorny, and then inside of the thorns, some ant species were living inside of the thorns.
How'd that help the plant? Oh, protecting the plant.
Yeah.
Okay, that works. Yeah, so I mean, mutualism, not a difficult one. Way more difficult is commensalism, but you come up with examples of it. Where you actually have a plus and a zero. One benefits, the other's unaffected. And you can argue that the other's not unaffected, it may actually be slightly negatively impacted, because I think they were talking about the whales and the barnacles or something.
Can kids be like that in a way? Because the parents benefit from having like an offspring, and then the kid doesn't really care. I mean, the kid just doesn't really care that he's alive. Like, he doesn't really understand the concept that he's alive or whatever. So he just doesn't really affect him.
I appreciate you trying to stand up for your species, since you don't seem to be a cohort in your eyes. So we'll just call you a different species entirely. And since your commensalism happens between two different species, but
Well, this is more like a plus, and the other one is positively and negatively affected.
back to kids again, huh?
Yeah.
Getting to make them is a positive. Having them is the negative. Yeah.
Like this, like trees and woodpeckers, they burrow into the tree, but then they also keep insects out of it.
Okay.
So like the tree had a big hole in it, but it has less parasites now. But actually, that was a species of cactus.
The only one that really comes to mind that I could look at you and say, I'm pretty sure this is commensal, would be a bird building a nest in a tree. The bird benefits, and the tree's kind of unaffected, most likely.
Unless the bird uses the tree's branches, like it breaks off the branch.
Yeah, well, typically they weave it, and they want to leave the branches because it's cover for the chicks. So, I mean, that's probably the best one I could come up with off the top of my head, where it's pretty purely commensal. And then the books talk about all kinds of things. And then they talk about this other gig called facilitation. And I'm not going to get into it because, honestly, it's so vague. It's just Campbell sounding important as best I could tell, but the word facilitate, of course, means, what's the root word of facilitate? Facile, to make easy. So you're facilitating you have an effect, your presence has a positive effect later on or further down the road. And you can kind of argue maybe a beaver building his dam positively affects other organisms, but it's less direct. I mean, you know, in all these other situations, one is living on or in the other. Beaver creating a dam that creates a lake benefits birds and fish and whatever. Beaver didn't really mean to do it. Beaver wasn't trying to affect these other things, he just did it, and that's the end result. So I guess that's facilitation. Yeah, and they were talking about some juncus weed. Yeah, whatever. The diversity and that other stuff was kind of.
Yep, got a good one. Plants, they, when they go through photosynthesis, they release more oxygen in the air, and we breathe it in, and that helps us, even though the plant was doing it unintentional.
Yes and no, because the plants need oxygen too.
Oh, yeah, then we.
Yeah, I was talking to a couple other AP teachers, and they were amazed because their kids would come in and say that plants weren't really alive. They didn't think plants were actually alive. It's interesting how dead things grow.
Yes.
Well, they have cells, which means they're alive.
Yeah, I don't, well, not necessarily, prisons have cells, but they're not alive.
Have you ever broken off a branch of a tree and then used it to find water?
Oh, dowsing?
Yeah, dowsing.
I've never tried it.
Never tried it? Like, how does it work though? I don't get that.
Me either, which is why I never tried it. Alright, so let's talk about trophic structure, because we could probably wrap this chapter. Trophic structures are interesting. There are certain roles in feeding, roles in energy transfer. Your book is really obtuse about this. The entire reason that you are going to look at a trophic structure is simply from the perspective of how is mass and energy moved between different feeding levels. So ultimately, what is the only source of energy coming to planet Earth? Sir? Sunlight. So that's time for your lunch, I think. Yeah. So forgot I had done that for you. All right.